Right, all right, all right, all right. We are back again. Let's see what it is. We are back again. I'm just going to get myself nice and comfortable. Just lounge out to this conversation. But we are back again. So thank you for tuning in. Yes, sir. See, we got some people in the building. Truth Teacher is going to be our special guest today. Let me go to the comments. We were just live 2 times, but it was kind of goofy, so we're back again. We're back again. We are back again. Peace, peace, peace. We are back again. Let me do something here. Let me go tune that down a little bit so I don't have all that glare in there. Yes, sir. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are talking about Fat Joe controversy, the talk, the conversation. Let some people get up in the building and welcome you. Peace. Let me know where you're from, who you are, where you're from. I see we got a couple of people who were just with us a minute ago. So thank you for coming back. You got to love technology when it works. It's the most beautiful thing in the world. When it doesn't work, it's horrible. So, yeah, we're going to get this going. We're going to get this going. Listen, we're just going to go ahead and invite our guest back in and let him start to cook. So I'm going to go ahead and bring my guest in. I'm going to add him to the stage. Well, welcome back, bro.
Hey,
We're back again.
good to be back.
Yeah. All right, man. So listen, you reached out to me and you wanted to speak to a couple of things that, were really passionate in your heart about this, a couple of things. Fat Joe, FBA, you know, Caribbeans, the whole thing, man.
Yeah.
Take us I'm gonna just let you start, just talk, man. What's on your mind? What is it that you want to say? And then that'll help the conversation. I'll be putting people's comments on the screen as they come in for you to answer or deal with. But what are you thinking about? What's your thoughts?
Well, I think this whole thing it's a deflection from a much bigger issue, right? Because what's going on here is really much bigger than Fat Joe. They're using Fat Joe as a springboard to really vent their xenophobia and their racism and to really deflect from the real issue. Now,
Who are
Fat
we
Joe,
talking? Who? Let's be clear about who we're talking about.
okay, so we're talking about the those people online who are identifying themselves by the moniker FBA. Now, they're trying to conflate FBA with African Americans in general. And they're taking what Fat Joe had to say out of context to imply that his sentiments were aimed at the African American community in general. And when you hear them saying things, I don't understand. There was a room full of black people there, and they let that man use the N-word, call them the N-word. Look, he was very specific about who he was talking about, right? He wasn't talking about African Americans in general.
Absolutely.
They're taking it out of context, and they know it. They're deliberately taking this out of context. First
Well,
of
let me ask you this: Why would you? Why? So then, why do you feel like so many people are up in arms, offended?
I think that the ones who are primarily up in arms are people who belong to this particular group that he shouted out, you know.
Mhm.
And like I said, they're trying to conflate FBA with African Americans in general as an attempt to get the entire African American community on their side to cancel Fat Joe.
Mm, mm,
The fact of
mhm.
the matter is that they do not represent the African American community as a whole. So let's go to the first thing that they're trying to use. The fact that Fat Joe was using the N word. Well, here's the thing, and this is something that they all know. Any of us who come from urban areas, right? We all know this. The way the N word is used, it's used grammatically as a masculine pronoun, right? So it's used as a replacement for guy, man, dude, you know. So instead of saying that guy or that man, that N word, instead of saying, oh, he's my dude, he's my friend, that's my N word. So it's used as a pronoun. It's also used as a term of endearment, right? Now, we can argue over whether or not anyone should be using that term to begin with. We can talk about what was the history of it. But the fact of the matter is, this is the way we speak in urban communities, whether you have an issue with it or not with that particular word. But here's the thing you got to keep in mind. We from the Caribbean or the African continent, and when I say Caribbean, I'm talking about Spanish speaking and English speaking people from the Caribbean because we're all West Indians, right? Puerto Rico, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Haiti, that's part of the West Indies. Jamaica is only like what, 90 miles south of Cuba? We're all in the same geographical area. So if Jamaicans are West Indians and Trinidadians are West Indians, Puerto Ricans and Cubans and Dominicans and Haitians are West Indians too. One island, we have the Spanish speaking islands, we got the French speaking islands, we got the English speaking islands. Okay, we're all West Indians, we're all Caribbean. We came to the United States, right? Either as immigrants or people born to immigrant parents. And we're all living amongst African Americans. So for people who speak Creole or Spanish as a first language, who are you learning English from? You're learning English from the people in your environment. Who are the primary demographic who are English speaking in the neighborhoods you end up in? African Americans. If you're coming from the English speaking Caribbean, as I did, sort of, kind of. I was born in Soundview, spent my childhood in Jamaica, and then I came back to the United States, to the Bronx, Grand Concourse, 1976. We have our own way of speaking English. We have actually two versions of English. We have standard English with a heavy accent, and then we have our Creole or Patois. You know, we've got those two. So, who did I learn English from when I came here? Because when I came back, I had a very heavy accent, very thick, heavy accent, right? But when you're a young person and you grow up in a particular community, you're going to automatically assimilate the language that's being spoken around you. So I assimilated to a great deal. Well, I mean, I could code switch because I had Jamaican English or Jamaican English, Patois. Then I had standard English. And then I had what some people call Ebonics, right? Because the majority of the people that were around me were African American and Puerto Rican. And everybody was speaking the same lingo. So this term, the N word, is something that we learned from African Americans. And as a matter of fact, when we came here, we were mystified because we knew the history behind that word and we couldn't figure out, given the history, why are they using this word for themselves? Like my mom and my aunts and uncles, they would say they'd be mystified. They'd be getting on the train in the morning, going to school, and like guy would be getting on the train, and his wife would be seeing him off. He'd say, "Bye, N-word," and they'd be mystified. So that was always a mystery. So you can't blame us for using the word that you taught us, because you used the word speaking to us. Yo, and what's up? Whether you were West Indian or Puerto Rican or whatever, yo, and what up? You my N-word, so we have been brought up in that cultural context. And the way Fat Joe was using that word was consistent with the way we use that word in our social interactions. All right. So he wasn't using it in the same way that like a Ku Klux Klan member would use that word. Right. And once again, we can argue whether or not we should be using that word at all. But the fact of the matter is, this is the way we speak. And we learn this speech from African Americans. And African Americans are the ones who have exported this word around the globe. I'll give you a for instance. I think a lot of people know, but not everybody knows. I'm a dancer and I do Egyptian dance. So I've spent a lot of time traveling back and forth to Egypt over the years. Egypt is the one place outside of the United States that I'm more familiar with even than my own country, which I haven't been to since 1982. I've been traveling to Egypt on a regular basis since 1988. So in Cairo, right on the side of the Nile, they have these fishing boats, right? That they rigged out. They put, like these party lights on them, and they got like a DJ in the back playing music. And that's a form of entertainment for the local people who are very poor. They can't afford a lot of luxuries. So for like $1, the equivalent to us of $1, They all get on this little party boat. They take them on the Nile for a spin, a little 20-minute spin. They're blasting music. Everybody's up and dancing and having a good time. And then, you come back, and if you want to, you can jump on another boat, whatever. It's a fun time. So that's one of my favorite pastimes. It's like I get out there, and Egyptian people are extremely social and friendly. So if they're up and dancing, they're going to pull you up to dance with them too. And they see like I can bust a couple of moves. Oh, it's that thing when you make a connection with somebody and they see that you have a connection to an aspect of their culture, whether it's speaking the language or whatever. It's that recognition and wow, that appreciation that you would respect or you have admiration for their culture. So I'm talking with this kid. And we're using broken English and broken Arabic, right? And he says to me, you like this music? And I said, yeah, I like this music. He said, like, like what kind of, which singers do you like? And I'm naming like the different singers that I like and stuff. And he said, yeah, I like that music too. He says, but my friend, he doesn't like Egyptian music. And I said, really? Why? I said, what kind of music does he like? He says, he likes N-word music. And it's like, it's like I'm clutching my pearls. I'm like, oh. But then I had to like think really quick in my head. I'm like, okay. In my mind, I'm thinking to myself, look at this kid. He's 3 or 4 shades darker than you are. He doesn't really speak English. So I ask him, do you know what N-word means? And he says no. And I try to explain to him as best I can what that word means, that it's not a good word for anyone to be using. But then he's looking at me puzzled, because if that's the case, then why are these people calling themselves that? Why are they using this word? And I'm thinking to myself, why are they calling it N-word music? How did that happen? And I think to myself, okay, if I don't speak English and I'm listening to rap music, because that's what he means. His friend likes rap music. If I don't speak English and I'm listening to rap music, and when was this? This was 2005. If you don't speak English and you're listening to rap music, what does it sound like to you? It must be da 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 da, N-word, da 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 da, N-word, da da, N-word, 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 N-word. The one word that you can clearly make out, and that's in every single song, is the N-word. So what are you going to call it? You're going to call it N-word music. So once again, it's like you can't blame other people for using the term that you taught them how to use.
Yeah. Yeah. As you're breaking this down, I want to take a step back real quick, and I want you to speak to the whole conversation of FBA as because they say this is not a group, this is a lineage. Talk to us about why this is most definitely a group. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about this. Cook a little bit.
Well, for one thing, you can't trademark a lineage. The term FBA is trademarked by Tariq. You can't trademark African American. You cannot trademark Black American because that is a lineage. Okay? We're talking about, first of all of us over here on this side of the Atlantic, we are descendants of the African diaspora, right?
Yes.
We're descendants of ancestors who were taken from Africa and brought to the Western Hemisphere. So the United States is not the only place where Africans were brought and enslaved,
Absolutely.
right?
It wasn't even the first place.
It wasn't even the first place. We were ground zero.
That's right.
As a matter of fact, Dominican Republic and Haiti was ground zero, followed by Cuba, Jamaica, Puerto Rico. Jamaica was originally a Spanish colony. It got taken away from Spain in 1655, but it was originally a Spanish colony. Okay, so we are ground zero for the African slave trade. There were more slaves, there were more Africans taken to Mexico than came to the United States. That's why if you go on YouTube and you look up Mexican DNA results, just about every Mexican that you see on there, they have anywhere between, on average, between 2 and 8% African ancestry. Okay? The only difference is that unlike the United States, there were no laws against interracial unions. And so the majority of the Africans that were brought to Mexico got assimilated into the general population. But there's still little pockets where you can find people that are definitely, you can tell, they're most definitely predominantly African descent, but so that's the thing. It's like being an African American, that is a lineage. And we're talking about the first group of people who were brought from Africa to what is now called the United States. Back then it was the colonies, right? That first group of people, the descendants of that first group of people, that's who we're talking about. So we're talking about that first group. Later on, we had other people of the African diaspora come, like after slavery. But, something, to be honest, the United States was never hermetically sealed from the rest of the African diaspora, because you had, at the time when the 13 colonies were still owned by the British, you had slaves that were being brought from Barbados and certain Caribbean islands to colonies, on the eastern seaboard. They were coming from Jamaica, Barbados, all these different places. New Orleans, when it was under the rule of the French and the Spanish, it alternated. You had migrations coming from those places to New Orleans. So, looking at the Gullah Geechee in the Sea Islands, once again, there's a connection there. There's a historic, Veracruz, that's true. There's a historic connection. But we didn't really start coming in large numbers until the late 19th century. I have branches of my family who came here in the 1890s to Philadelphia. And they intermarried with the African Americans here. They were serving the African American community. My ancestor was a dentist. His practice was in the African American community in Philadelphia. So that's who we're talking about. That's a lineage. FBA is an ideology. And that was something that was coined, honestly, not even by Tariq initially. It was, this woman, I don't remember her last name. Yvette, Yvette something. No, but she first coined the term BA, and Tariq started using that, and then he added FBA. So he got the idea originally from someone else, and then he trademarked it. Now, why are you trademarking a name? If you're a lineage, why do you have to trademark? Did anybody trademark African American? And people, say, oh, well, I don't identify as African American. I'm a Black American, whatever. Jesse Jackson made up that term in the whenever. Okay, but did Jesse Jackson trademark African American? So what's the purpose of trademarking something?
Yeah, let me say something real quick. I just looked it up. Yvette Carnell is her name, and she created the American Descendants of Slavery. And so Tariq, in that great video you showed me, Tariq basically loved the name, which was originally DOS, the Descendants of Slavery. Let me put myself on the screen. The Descendants of Slavery, and he liked that name. He liked that name, and eventually. Um, he came up with another name, but it really didn't rock. It really didn't fit, really didn't vibe. And so he came up with the foundational, meaning, we're foundational to this land. So yeah, her name was Yvette Carnell, and that's who,
Yeah.
coined it. And there's somebody in the comments when you're speaking about the whole idea of trademarking, right?
Hmm.
Um, they're saying where are your sources for this trademark thing you're talking about? And again, you see what I'm saying? Here we go again. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah. So go ahead, continue. I didn't mean to mess up your flow.
So, that's the thing, is like this is a movement with an ideology. Okay. And if you saw that video that I sent you, these people are directly tied in with white nationalists. What's happening is that white nationalists are using certain people in the African American community to be a buffer for their anti immigrant propaganda, as a way of saying, you see, we're not racist because even Black people agree with us. And this is nothing new in this country, all right? At every stage of the fight for civil rights and justice in this country, there have always been collaborators who worked with the powers that be to undermine the efforts of freedom movements. We can start by talking about what happened with Marcus Garvey's movement and how that was undermined by the FBI. We can talk about how the CIA had paid agents who infiltrated the civil rights movement to undermine Martin Luther King, to get him, to try to blackmail him from doing what he was doing. We can talk about how the Black Panthers was infiltrated. We can talk about, for example, Malcolm X. How did he end up getting assassinated? Those were paid agents by the powers that be who went in there and did what they did. So we shouldn't be surprised that the same tactics are still being used today. When you listen to the rhetoric of the anti immigrant sentiment that's being spewed by FBA, it is literally cut and pasted from white nationalist talking points.
Absolutely. 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 I don't know how they don't I don't know how they don't see that. I don't know how they don't hear these same things. Keep cooking, because I want to jump back to Fat Joe and
Mhm.
his. I want to sort of dissect that, but keep going. Most
You know,
definitely.
my awareness of, I don't even like speaking his name.
Mm-hmm.
Call him Mr. T.
Mm-hmm.
Was when he came out with the Hidden Colors series.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm a former history teacher, and I really believe that it is important to be knowledgeable of our history as people of the African diaspora because of the slander that we've been taught by the educational system. However, you can't just grab things willy nilly. You have to really investigate if the material and the information that you have is true. Now, I will say this, there is enough real history, whether you're talking about the African diaspora as a whole, or if you're talking just about African Americans in particular. There is enough credible, amazing history to be had without having to invent things.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so eventually I got to see that first Hidden Colors video
Mm-hmm.
documentary that he made, and I was disappointed because there was a lot of that, historical revisionist type of stuff going on, which is easily debunked. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, you know what? He's got his heart is in the right place, whatever. And then he made, like a couple more videos, and then he did the Haitian Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get a chance to see that, but I figure, okay, I'm really busy. I'll get a chance to see it, eventually. And
Mm-hmm.
then out of left field, I hear Mr. T talking about Haitians and the things that he's saying. He's calling Haitians AIDS carriers
Mm-hmm.
and accusing Haitians of infecting the United States with AIDS,
Mm-hmm.
as well as Africans. And my head is spinning because I'm like, wait a minute, how do you go from being Pan African and all of this and championing the Haitian Revolution to calling the same group of people AIDS carriers?
Mm-hmm.
And then the more I hear, now it's not just Haitians, it's he's attacking West Indians in general
Mm-hmm.
and African, immigrants. And at that point, this is when the whole issue of reparations started to surface.
Mm-hmm.
And he was using reparations as the springboard to spew this rhetoric. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we're the reason.
Mm-hmm.
West Indians and Black immigrants are the reasons why African Americans aren't getting reparations.
Now here's the funny thing, truth, is that in speaking to, we heard the shout out to Radical Latino, man. Thank you so much, brother. We heard um the comments by Fat Joe. We heard him talking about specifically FBA, the Foundation of Black Americans.
Yeah.
Also, there are the ADOS, the African descendants of slavery, of slaves, and so it's what's happening is that people are taking this to mean that every African American is a foundational Black American or part of that organization. Now, there are so many African Americans that I spoke to that do not subscribe, that are not, they don't identify with that because they understand their struggle didn't need a new name attached to it. The history showed the struggle for Black and brown people. And so, when we're talking about hip hop and that whole history, I've had African American pioneers who I'm going to choose to leave nameless because they have asked me to leave them nameless. But when I talk about pioneers, I'm talking about pioneers that go beyond the pioneers that we are talking about in microphone check and all that. I'm talking about people who are further back than that. They're older than them.
Hmm.
And this particular pioneer told me, and I spoke to him on the phone, and again he asked me, please just don't keep my name. So I respect that.
Hmm.
But I asked him the question: is hip hop culture Black American culture? And he said, I mean, he didn't even flinch. No, absolutely not. There was a plethora of people involved in it, in this movement, right? That later became a culture. It doesn't even become a culture until the early 80s. But the elements are clearly there, right? So this is really what Fat Joe is listen, he kind of just let it all hang out at that point, right? Because over the past 2 years, he has been under the attack. And listen, this man is living his life. Him and Busta Rhymes, they're living their lives. They said what they said and they moved on. They're not, but finally, he just sort of said, listen, and it's this group, this specific group. I just saw something with Mr. T yesterday, and he did a live. And again, trying to use these straw man arguments, these ad hominem arguments to try to discredit what Fat Joe clearly said and who he was clearly talking about. Now, look, I'm not a dumb person, and neither are you. But if I'm sitting in a barber shop with a group of people who are African Americans, some of them are Caribbean descendants, but I'm sitting in a barber shop. Do you really believe that I'm going to walk into the barber shop and I'm going to make a blanket statement and say that all Black Americans are racist people? He didn't say that. He was specific about what he said and who he was talking to. Because I don't believe Math Hoffa or anybody else in that room would have just stood there had he came out and said, yo, the reality is all Black Americans are racist. He didn't say that. And this is the problem, that they're jumping on this they've been looking for something. They're looking for
Exactly.
something to have an argument about. And the reality is Joe was clear about what he said and who he was talking to.
Hmm.
And the fact that people are upset because he would have the audacity to claim that New Yorkers and Black Americans and Caribbean Americans created the culture of hip hop together in the Bronx, in New York City, that he has no right to say that. And here's the real reason: because of the skin complexion of Fat Joe. Speak
But
to that.
but
Speak
yo,
to it.
you know something? We have certain people in the African American community, right, that are going down and looking at this particular region in Mexico, these ruins that were made by a people called the Olmecs. And they have these large heads that have wide noses and thick lips. And based on those features alone, they said, you see, this is proof that Africans created this civilization. Has anyone ever really took a good look at Fat Joe? I mean, seriously. Okay, he's pale skinned,
Real talk. Look at
but look
it.
at those feet. Listen, there's this thing in the United States history called passing for white, where you had people of African lineage who were so mixed. They had so much European ancestry in their bloodline, they didn't look any different than a European. And so oftentimes, in order to get the heat off of them, they'd move someplace where nobody knew them and just blend in.
Right.
Where the hell could Fat Joe blend in?
Mm-hmm.
Listen,
Mm-hmm.
everybody, there's a channel on YouTube called NYTN. I advise everybody to go and watch that channel because it's this content creator. Her name is Danielle, and she is following the history of her family. She realized that even though she was raised quote unquote white, she's actually a person of African descent because her great grandmother was a mixed race person of African descent from Louisiana who passed for white. Okay? And they talk about how, people were so scrutinized, their features. There's a lot there on that channel.
Mm-hmm.
There is no way in hell that someone who looked like Fat Joe would have ever passed for white. Not with that nose and those lips.
Mm-hmm.
No way in hell.
Absolutely. You know,
So,
I think there's somebody who's saying, you know, and again, I don't want to get off into this colorism thing. The reality is they're upset. It has nothing to do with it, it, they're not really upset with Joe because of his skin tone. They're upset with Joe that he would dare to say once again that Puerto Ricans had anything to do with the creation of hip hop. And so then there's Busta Rhymes, who so it's something that they're looking for. People are, trying to make something bigger than what it is. And what it is, I was watching a live last night, and one of the guys, and I spoke to you about this, and one of the guys, this was a guy from Jersey, and he was speaking about, this whole thing. And he was talking to this issue of that really hip hop comes from New Jersey because the first rappers in a rap record were from New Jersey, and Sugar Hill Records was in New Jersey, so therefore, it comes from New Jersey. And he kept going back to rap music, rap music, rap music. Um, Here's a case in point. There is a great YouTuber by the name of Hassan Campbell. And Hassan Campbell is known, Poppy, and he's been chiming in on the Fat Joe controversy thing. And he said, I don't agree with Tariq. I don't agree with these people who are saying that this comes from, strictly Black American culture. And he referenced the first thing he referenced. He said, just look at Beach Street. And I kind of grabbed my head like, what are you talking about, bro? He said, just look at Beach Street. You see Rocksteady, they're breakdancing. But see, even people within the culture don't know the real backstory. They
mhm.
know Beach Street. You
Yeah,
can't start with Beach Street. And this is a dude who was in Zulu. He was, so there's a lot of people who don't know this information. And to be quite honest, they're learning it because they're watching us. A
yeah.
lot of these guys
And
had no idea what any of this was before
listen,
they started watching us.
here's the thing. First of all, before we go on, I got to give a shout out to the Radical Latino because I found out about you from his channel. With the interview that he did with you. So, Rad, shout out to you. You owe me a phone call, and I want my damn flowers. You know what I'm talking about. But listen, it's a combination of different things. There's xenophobia, there's racism in the mix, there's colorism in the mix. There's lack of information in the mix. It's a combination of a lot of things. Here's what everybody needs to understand. At the time when this was being created, we had no idea what was going on. We were just living in the moment. So let me change gears here. I can understand when somebody says this is Black culture. I can understand their perspective, because really what we're talking about here is a matter of perspective. I can understand when people say, no, it's not Black culture, this is urban street culture. I can understand that too. I can understand when somebody says this is American culture. I can understand that too. There's elements of truth in all of those statements. You can have more than one truth at the same time. It's kind of like a Venn diagram. Now, let's just say, for the sake of argument, Black culture, all right? Okay. But hip hop culture, is it representative of Black culture in the same way? Or, okay, let's narrow it down even further, okay? Let's just narrow it down to music, period, all right? Because we know that hip hop is more expansive than just music, right? The music is just one element of the culture, and even within the music, there's further divisions, right? Because we've got the MC and we got the DJ, right? But we're just going to look at the music and just focus there for right now, okay? Even if you want to say the music is Black American culture, it's not. Its history, its inception is not the same as, for example, blues. It's not the same as gospel. It's not the same as R&B. Those genres of music were made primarily in communities that were segregated, right? To a large degree. There were no other ethnic groups involved when those musical genres were being created. The music of hip hop, or hip hop in general as a culture, didn't form in that context. There was never a time in New York City, in the Bronx, when African Americans existed in isolation from the other two groups of people in this conversation.
Absolutely.
We were all there together. So even if you want to say it's Black American culture, okay, I'll give you that. But here's the thing. I personally don't get hung up on that issue. And the reason I don't is because of this. You do not have to be born from a particular culture to be able to participate in it, innovate in it, and make something new. And the analogy that I'll give is this. If we look at the automotive industry and we look at the electronics industry, right? Those scientific advancements came out of American science. Okay, so you could say American culture, right? Because science is a part of the product of that society. Who right now dominates? Who right now dominates the automotive industry and electronics? the Japanese, and the Koreans. I got a Samsung. That doesn't come out of the United States. Samsung, if I believe correctly, that's a Korean company. All right. Toyota, Honda, Hyundai. The overwhelming majority of cars that you're going to see on the highway today are coming from either Japan or South Korea. Practically all of the electronics that we have in our day-to-day lives come out of East Asia. They didn't originate that. They picked it up and they innovated within it. They perfected it. They took it to the next level, and they have taken that, and now they're creating so many other things. So does it really matter? Are you going to say that, you can't give Koreans and Japanese credit for their scientific contributions because, oh, well, this started in the United States. This is the United States, American technology. They have nothing to do with it. They didn't create the automotive industry. They didn't. Does that make any sense? It doesn't make any sense. But here's the other thing that we got to keep in mind, all right? Every single culture, and once again, we're turning back to music now, okay? Every single culture on the face of the earth borrows from other cultures. Every single one. So, for example, I do Egyptian dance, right? Dance to Egyptian music. Egyptian music has borrowed from European music. It's borrowed from Greek, Turkish, Persian, as well as their own local folkloric styles. Everybody borrows. If we look at, for want of a better term, white American music, weren't they impacted by elements of African continuity? Appalachian music, like we all hear, every time we hear a banjo being played, the first image that comes to your mind is, some hillbilly in Arkansas, right? But did they invent that instrument? No, they didn't. That instrument, the banjo, that became so iconic in white rural music form, actually came out of Africa. There's a stringed instrument called the akonting in the Niger River region of West Africa that was brought to the United States by enslaved Africans, and that is what developed into the banjo. There are things that survive in the African American communities that are still remnants of aspects of culture from Africa. And the way they sing, the feeling, the intonation that they put into it, that's all coming from Africa. That's coming directly from the Niger River region of Africa. When you listen to that music and you listen to the way they use the voice, the modulation of the voice, that's coming directly from there. That was infused, that was picked up by European immigrants who lived in proximity with, these enslaved Africans that came over. So their music has been impacted by African elements. African American music has been impacted by European elements. In fact, it wouldn't exist without European elements. For the first thing, every last single musical instrument that we find in African American music is coming from Europe. If we go back to the earliest forms of African American music, we always start with, talking about the spirituals. Well, what is the spirituals? The spirituals are hymns. Christianity, Protestant Christianity, is not a traditional African spiritual tradition. All right? So Christianity itself, Protestant Christianity, Baptist, Pentecostal, whatever it is, comes from Europeans. The hymns, the spiritual, what are they? African Americans take on Protestant hymns. They put their own feeling and their own inflections and everything into it. They created something new. So that was them assimilating into aspects of European culture and creating something new.
So
let's look at the backbone.
wait. I got a thought in my head.
Mhm.
So they would argue, especially the foundational Black American lineage group, would argue that their music is nothing. There is nothing. They borrowed nothing. They borrowed no. There's no European influence in their music. There's no European influence in their dance. There's no European influence in in rapping and rhyming.
Listen,
Talk to that.
there is not one single culture on this side of the Atlantic that is 100% pure anything. I don't care if you're talking about South America, Brazilian music, Cuban music, Puerto Rican music, Jamaican music, African American music, every last Mexican music, every last single one of us, our music styles are the result of cross-cultural pollination. It's all a blend in varying degrees of Native American musical traditions, African and European. Every last single one of us. Every one of us. Our popular music, our folk musics are all a blend. So what the hell is the big deal? Let's look at jazz. Where does jazz come from? Jazz is a spin-off from European marching band music. That's where it begins, in New Orleans. There's no doubt about it. That history is there. It's undeniable. But what did they do? They took things and they innovated. So African Americans assimilated into an aspect, once again, of European culture. They innovated and they created something new. They created jazz out of that. And for Mr. D telling me, no, I'm crazy, prove me wrong. Where does jazz come from? What are the instruments in jazz? Piano. Where does the piano come from? Does that come from Africa? Was the piano invented by a Black American? Were the trumpets, the brass, was that invented by African Americans? The standing bass, was that invented by African Americans? All the instruments that we have in a jazz orchestra, which one of them was invented by African Americans? And even the one that was invented by them didn't come out of nowhere. It was recycled. They recycled the drum kit. The drum kit was invented by an African American musician. But it wasn't something that came out of nowhere. They took the drums from the marching band and he put them on stands. And then he took the big bass drum And he put that there. And then he took the symbols. The symbols come from the Chinese and the Turks. You go to any music store right now, who produces the top one, without a doubt, the top quality cymbals? It's a company called Zildjian. That's a Turkish company. Zil in Turkish means cymbal. Hold on one second. Let me show you something. Where's my stuff? I'll be right back.
Yes, sir, guys. So we're getting into some deep history here, right? We have to talk about this because this all goes back to the Fat Joe conversation. So just stay with us. You keep asking for sources. Where are your sources to disprove what he's saying, my friend? But keep going, my man.
Okay, so, as I said, I do Egyptian dance. In Egyptian music, they borrowed an instrument from, we call them the Turks today. But when you're talking about the ancient world, we call them the Anatolians. These people invented cymbals. Okay, now you look at the drum kit, and once again, another example of cross-cultural pollination. Egypt was under the domination of the Ottoman Empire, but even before that, because if you go to the museum in Egypt, you'll see this instrument going back to the time of the Roman era. This is when this instrument was introduced into Egypt. But you look at this, and you see this is just a smaller version of the hi-hat in a drum kit, or you have the two, that's where it comes from. So in New Orleans, you had Chinese immigrants, you had Turkish immigrants. They borrowed the cymbals from them, and that made up the drum kit. So it is recycling older elements. And that's the same thing that African Americans did. So even if we want to say this is Black culture, well, listen, Puerto Ricans made contributions. And this is the thing, it's like when we're talking about the contributions of Puerto Ricans to hip hop, we have to step back because we have to look at the bigger picture, okay? We have to talk about the contributions that they made to American music in general. All right? So those elements were in the music. You find it in the funk. You find it in the soul. You find it in the Motown. It's there. Now, does that mean that we're trying to say that funk was invented by Latinos? No. But they use certain elements at different times in their artistic creations. This is what every culture does. Every culture does it. Every culture is doing it. For example, you look at the Beatles. They came out of England. What gave them their start? At a time when Black Americans had forgotten about blues musicians and all of that stuff, and that was old, oh, that's, played out, whatever. The Beatles were listening to those old blues musicians from the 40s and the 50s, and they were doing covers of their songs. Later on in the 60s, in the late 60s, they started experimenting with, sounds from India. You had rock and roll bands that were going to North Africa and, and experimenting. This is what all musicians, all artists do. They experiment with different elements to come up with new things. So this is crazy that you have this group of people, they're trying to take art and they're trying to twist it into a racial issue. This is ridiculous.
I want to speak to something that they continue to bring up as well. Excuse me. They bring up the turntable. Well, in hip hop, the turntable, that's the first thing. It's the turntable. The turntable was not invented by Black Americans. The first One of the first people you see with a turntable in the early 1900s, his name was Ray Newby. Okay? This is a white Caucasian dude. Really, to me, who cares? I don't even care about that. But
Exactly.
to prove the point that everything comes from Black Americans is a totally false notion. It does not.
It doesn't. Because you can't say that about any group
No,
on the planet.
no.
They all borrowed from some opera. Opera was Europeans trying to reimagine what they thought the music of the Roman Empire was.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
ballet. When we hear the ballet, we think of two countries. We think about France and we think about the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
The inception of ballet, it grew out of an Italian folk dance that was brought to the French court by Catherine de Medici.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what evolved into ballet. The
Oh,
Russians picked it up from the French because at the time, Peter the Great, he was trying to modernize Russia and he saw France as being the most advanced society in the world at that time. So they emulated everything that the French did. They changed their architecture. They changed their fashion to mimic the French. They
mhm.
even spoke French, or they spoke Russian with a French accent. And they took ballet and then they did their own spin on it. They made their own innovation. So once again, we see that you don't have to be born in a particular culture to get into it and to adopt it and to make innovations and to make something new.
Mhm.
And
Now
then,
they would say, your comment would lend to the idea that, well, again, Puerto Ricans got involved later or Jamaicans got involved later. So this comment right here, what does that have to do with this? You're getting sidetracked. So let me explain to this person who continues to say that you are sidetracking the conversation. And I love what you said to me earlier, bro. You said this conversation is not a quick conversation.
mhm,
This is a deep dive. You can't just you have to present all of the nuances, so to speak, to get to the real issue of when we say we are co-creators of the culture of hip hop. You got to go through all of these ideas to understand that it has never been one specific culture to create
mhm.
anything. It has always been a conglomeration. So when we talk about, you mentioned, and I want you to touch on this, the Latin breakdown,
Yeah.
the documentary. In a nutshell, the documentary was meant to show and prove what the foundational sounds of the b-boy breaks, where did they come from? Now they would say, well, no, this comes from funk and that's it. and it just so happens to have a bongo in it. So what? It would have been dope without the bongo. Okay, okay. You watched the documentary.
Mm-hmm.
What did you feel that was presented that is vital to this conversation of Latinos specifically, and more specific Puerto Ricans, and more specific New Yorkers, and what they brought to the table sonically? Speak to
Well,
that.
first of all, that documentary was too short. That should have been like a 6-part docu-series because you could have drilled down in any one of those elements and made that an hour in and of itself. But once again, we have to understand, first of all, looking at the United States, what is the United States? It's not a monoculture. It has always been, since the beginning, it's always been a multicultural entity, no matter how much certain people don't like to acknowledge that fact. Okay? You go to lunch, typical American dish, pizza, hot dogs, French fries. All of our cuisine reflects the multicultural aspect of American life. Every ethnic group who has come to the United States has added something. Okay? Don't believe me? What the hell is Taco Tuesday? Okay, I'm gonna just digress. Arabian dance? No, it's Egyptian dance. There's a big difference between what they do in Egypt and what they do in Saudi Arabia. It's an African dance, okay? And Egypt is part of the African continent. But I digress. Let's go back to what we were talking about. Every ethnic group who's come to this United States has added something, all right? When we look at the history of the early 20th century, we'll see that the Cubans, the Puerto Ricans, they made a great contribution to the musical scene, not only here in the United States, but global. So once again, touching on Egypt as an example, mambo. You can find Egyptian compositions from that time period that was based on mambo and cha-cha-cha. They borrowed. That shows the impact that it had, not only here in the United States, but worldwide. Those percussions, and yes, African Americans had ways of keeping percussion because the drums were taken away from them, as we know. They created the drum kit, okay? And that's the first time we hear music from that period, where there is live percussion. But the type of percussion that comes from the Caribbean is different, okay? We're talking about hand drums, okay? That's not 2 sticks and a drum. Those drums from the drum kit, that's coming out of, it's a derivative of the European marching band playing with sticks, okay? The congas, without a doubt, were invented in Cuba. How does it end up in American music? Because it was adopted. If it hadn't been for the mambo and that cross-cultural interaction, Americans would have never known about that instrument. But you have to understand, you had African Americans playing in Latin bands, you had Latinos playing in African American bands for a very long time, since the beginning of the 20th century. When people come into contact with each other, they borrow elements. And it's no shame. It's no It's no insult to African Americans to say that those African American artists borrowed elements from that culture because everybody else did. White Americans borrowed it, they borrowed it too. Why is it that we look at the American musical landscape and we don't see these percussion instruments appearing in American pop music until we get to like the mid to late 60s? All of a sudden, they just pop up. Is that coincidence? When you had this massive musical movement that was happening
Hmm.
in the 40s, in the 30s, in the 40s, in the 50s,
Yes,
where
sir.
people are playing these instruments, and now in the 60s, you find this in American music. I mean, come on, it's just it's logic.
I want to speak to something really quick. So somebody, um, let me get that off the screen. So somebody made a comment of the connection. So again, you just sort of touched on it. This is a history here. We're talking history. So the the conga drum historically was never popular among African Americans. It was popular among Caribbeans.
Yeah.
Those are the facts. This is why before Chano Pozo and Dizzy Gillespie, you do not see that instrument in any African American musical form. He is the first one to use that in that way. And then you have, so they're asking, well, how does that end up, how you make the connection from that to the b-boy breaks that the breakers broke to? Okay, well, the connection is simple. That when you see that first seed being planted by Chano Pozo and Dizzy Gillespie, everything from then on, and you just said it, but everything from then on, other bands started to want that same sound. Dizzy Gillespie said, I didn't even know what the conga was called. That's how unfamiliar they were with these polyrhythms and these instruments. And so when we get to the 50s, we start to hear the implementation of the clave. We start to hear the implementation of bongo and conga. When we get to the 60s, it's the same thing. When we get to the 70s, so the b-boy anthems come from the 60s and the 70s, those records. So you have musicians who are creating music. They're not creating break beats. They're creating albums. These are bands and they're making albums. And they want those polyrhythms in their songs because they understood those Latin polyrhythms, those African polyrhythms were dope. And we want them in our music. And so when you get to this part, and this is why, the greatest example is Jimmy Castor, and it's just begun. He's clear. He said that he learned authentic music from Tito Puente and those guys, Richie Ray, Bobby Cruz, those guys, right? Mambo, all of that. So he incorporates that. So these bands create these records. They just create records. They create a song. The radio plays them, but then it's the DJs, you know, who start to dig in the crates and look for, but it's specifically the hip hop DJs, specifically people like Herc, people like Flash, people like Bambaataa, people like Charlie Chase, people like Breakout, the DJs.
Mhm.
And they are looking for specific breaks in these segments. This doesn't mean these records were Latin records. Some of
Exactly.
some of
Nobody's
them
saying that.
some of them were Latin breaks. You got Ray Barretto, so some of them were, but they weren't looking for those to say, let me find a Latin record. They're looking for the best record that have the segments that the DJs could take these funky segments and create a new sound, a new innovation. And that comes from two things: heavy funk and Latin percussions. And the Latin percussions specifically come from the Cubans and the Puerto Ricans. Those are specific. So when you listen to the B-boy anthems, and there is no greater example of what we watched when we watched the Olympic Games and we watched the B-boy competitions in the Olympics, specifically the B-girls. And what those DJs were playing was taking us back to the original B-boy anthems. And 90% of those records that they played were laced with the Afro percussive polyrhythms
Yeah.
that come from Machito and his Afro Cubans, that come from Tito Puente, that come from those rhythms. They're not influenced by African musicians from Africa. They're influenced by these Latin musicians who happen to have African DNA in them. But these are the people that they're not listening to African rhythms from Africa. They're listening to what these Latin musicians were bringing to the table with the hot cowbell or the hot timbale licks or the bongo. This is not to be denied. There is no denying this. And so that is the connection to us and the culture of hip hop. That's the initial connection. Never mind as it starts to, as it's birthed and it starts to, the initial connection is in the music. Follow the music and you
Yeah.
will see. What did y'all bring from your culture? Follow the music. That's what I would say.
Here's the thing, and I think people get it twisted because to point those things out, I think they look at it as a put down. Like if we admit that these artists borrowed elements from Latin culture, it makes African Americans less than. And that's ridiculous. Because listen, the fact that those African American artists incorporate these elements into their music is an even greater testament to their artistic level of genius. Because you have to be highly skilled to take different elements and bring them together in a way that works. Not everyone can do that. And being a dancer, being someone around, like I've been around a lot of musicians, people try to do all kinds of fusions and it doesn't work. You have to be highly skilled at what you're doing to make something that really works. And so these African American musicians who incorporated these elements into their creations, these were master musicians. Master musicians. So there's no shame in admitting that they took inspiration from here and from there, because once again, all artists everywhere in the world borrows inspiration from other cultures. African Americans didn't do anything different than artists anywhere else in the world. Jamaican music, reggae, is a is an example of multicultural fusion. It's a blend of our own folk music there that we had in Jamaica, which in itself was a blend of cultures, European and African and Native American elements. And we created our own folk music, our own mento. And then from that, we took inspiration from African American R&B musicians, and we borrowed, instead of using the bass, they use Byron Lee, a Chinese Jamaican, was the first one to use the electric bass guitar. And from that blend was created ska. And then ska evolved until we get to reggae. All musicians borrow from each other. Maya Angelou, you all know who she was, right? You know that Maya Angelou started out her career singing calypsos? Does that make her any less of an artist?
Right.
The
Right.
mother of African American dance, Catherine Dunham. If you don't know who she is, you need to go look her up. Catherine Dunham. When we think about Black American dance company, we think about Alvin Ailey.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Alvin Ailey was a protege of Catherine Dunham.
Mm-hmm.
Catherine Dunham was born in St. Louis, and she wanted to create a dance company for Black American people because you know what was going on back then.
Mm-hmm.
But she also wanted to know, why is it that Black people, why do they dance the way they do? Why do they move the way they do? Because Africans are unique in the entire world, mostly, for the way they approach movement, the way they approach the body. If we look at all of the dance traditions around the world, we'll see that it's mainly using the feet and the legs, different foot patterns through space.
Mm-hmm.
It's the arms and the legs, you're doing different things, different footsteps and stuff. The Africans, they don't just do footwork, they use the entire body,
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
torso, the shoulders, the hips. Africans use this part of the body. Everywhere else in the world, this part of the body is held very stiff.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at something, for example, like tap dance, this is another example of a fusion.
Mm-hmm.
That intricate articulation, rhythmic articulation of the feet comes directly out of Irish and English folk dancing, clogging,
Speak on it,
like
brother.
that.
Yes, sir. Speak on it. Yes.
But the African Americans, I mean, New York, first of all, let's give New York a shout out because so many innovations musically and artistically came out of New York. All right? Tap dancing was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Tap dancing is born when you had African Americans who picked up the Irish and the English folk dancing.
Mm-hmm.
But they did what human beings always do. You put your own spin in it, you put your own flavor in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, what did the African Americans bring with it? Because when you look at those dances that they did, clogging, whatever, the arms are very straight by your side, the spine is very stiff, and you're doing all of this footwork. African Americans came and they brought that swag, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's what created tap dance. So instead of being rigid, they went out of the box.
Yes.
And yeah, I'm gonna do that intricate, footwork, but I'm gonna do all these different patterns. And I'm gonna use my whole body to express myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you get tap dance.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone telling me that I'm lying, go do the research yourself. Go check it out. I'm not making it up. It's the truth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's no reason to be shamed or insulted or to feel slighted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The Spanish speaking people who came to this country, they made their contributions. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody picked it up. You find the Latin percussion, and let's define that term again, Latin. When we say Latin, we're not talking about Spaniards.
Right. Right.
We're not
Exactly.
talking about Spain.
Right.
But if we wanted to talk about Spain, we could talk about the African elements in Spanish music itself. the
Well,
Arabic and the African elements, but we're not talking about that right now.
before
We're
you
talking,
before you go into that, let me read something. Let me read something because you segued into something before I lose my thought. There's a PhD. His name is Paul Austerlitz, and he's a professor in the Conservatory of Music and Africana Studies program at Gettysburg College.
mhm.
And he's an ethnomusicologist. And he wrote something very interesting that I want to read. Um, this is an article called The Timeline of African American Music, and it's talking about the Latin influence in African American music. And he said something here. Watch this. He said, African American musicians began incorporating Afro Caribbean and Latin elements so thoroughly that while the influences are clear, the results sometimes obscured the origins of the specific rhythms at play. I want to read that again because I don't think people are getting this. So when they talk about, well, James Brown, there ain't no Latin. What? Let me read that again, based around the James Brown comment. African American musicians began incorporating Afro Caribbean and Latin elements so thoroughly that while the influences are clear, the results sometimes obscured the origins of the specific rhythms at play. So, for instance, give it up, turn it loose, that comment could be applied right to that because nobody understood. It was so obscured, it was so hidden that you didn't think about, oh, wait a minute, this influence came from Afro Caribbean and Latin people? Yes.
And the
And this
point
is an
is,
ethnomusicologist who is saying this. This is a source.
and the point is that there were such master musicians at their craft. They did it in such a way that it was so seamless that you don't even realize it. And it's the same thing when you listen to other funk songs, when you listen to Motown songs, when you listen to disco, when you listen to certain songs by the Jackson Five. I Want You Back. You know, like songs like that. In some of the clips, you can see them playing the congas. But you have to, once again, it's not a slight on African Americans to admit that they borrowed these elements because you have to be a master musician to be able to do it right. All the disco songs, I mean, come on. Disco music, it's ubiquitous in disco music.
Mhm.
And not even, you know, like hip hop, you know, we focus too finitely on one thing. You have to pull back and look at the bigger picture because the whole scope of American music and even African American music, it's much bigger than just hip hop, but all these pieces are connected. So when you look, for example, at the official music of Washington, D.C., it's what? It's go-go music.
Go, go. Yeah.
Now, that we can definitely say this began at a specific time and place. And we know the name of the specific person
Hmm.
who started it. We know this.
Right.
When you listen to what he has to say about how he came up with this, he was working in a Latin band for years.
Right. You
They were
sent me
called
that video. Yeah.
the Latinos, I think they were called.
Yep.
He was working with them. And he admits he took the Latin percussion, the congas and the timbales and the cowbells, and that is the foundation that he built go-go music on. And for those of you who don't know what go-go music is necessarily, if you're old enough, then you remember this song, doing the butt, da, 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 work it,
Hmm.
doing the butt. That's go-go music.
Hmm.
And so what you're hearing in that, it's a blend of funk and Latin percussion.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the foundation that built go-go music. And go-go music is the official language, the official music of Washington, D.C.
Right. Right.
from
Right.
the Black community.
Right. Right.
You don't get more Black than that.
Right.
And he said, yeah, we did that. Listen, we were all up in each other's business.
Mm-hmm.
Latin people were working in jazz bands and rock bands and funk bands and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at, for example, the religion, like you all know, I'm a Lukumi, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Listen, let me tell you something. Some of the best musicians, because when we play those African rhythms, those Yoruba
Mm-hmm.
songs, and we sing them in Yoruba language. And we use not only the congas, but the sacred drums, the bata drums that you can still see being played in Nigeria today.
Mm-hmm.
We kept that
Mm-hmm.
alive,
Mm-hmm.
right? Some of the most sought after musicians in the religion
Mm-hmm.
are African American.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In the summertime, if you go to Rockaway Beach, they have the Yamaya Festival. And we're out there, we're drumming for Yamaya, doing our
Mm-hmm.
ceremony. Most of the musicians in that band are either Caribbean or African American.
Right.
And listen, we so good at it. I've been out there when Nigerians, Yorubas, they pass by and they're like, what is this? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how are you? That's our music. Those are our
Mm-hmm.
songs. That's our language.
Mm-hmm.
Are you guys Nigerian? We're like, no. And what do you see? You see African Americans, you see West Indians, you see Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Cubans. We're all out there. We all up in each other's business. We've been all up in each other's business.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
people outside of New York, you don't understand. And we're not saying that as a put down, we're telling you the truth.
Right.
We're connected in so many different ways. Hip hop is just one example of many different ways that we are interconnected, that we have always been interconnected since we started coming to this country.
Yeah, that's so the initial conversation was about I don't know, I don't remember. We've been on here for a minute, so I don't remember if you
Yeah.
spoke to it. There are some people in the comments that are saying, no, let's start with me. I agree with what Fat Joe said. I don't
Mm-hmm.
agree with the way he said it.
Yeah.
And so, this is going to be a topic for people for months probably. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to start again. And in your estimation, in your opinion, did you did you see the interview first of all?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. What were your thoughts on the interview, on what he said? Um, whether that was him going at Mr. T or him going at Lord Jamar. Um, what did you feel? What were your thoughts?
Well, as far as his opinion of Lord Jamar's level of talent,
Mm-hmm.
they ain't got nothing to do with nothing.
Mm-hmm.
As far as his assessment that FBA is a black supremacist hate group,
Mm-hmm.
where's the lie? Now, some
Mm-hmm.
people may take offense to that, but listen, I can only judge a person by their conduct.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand, if you don't understand the conversation and you don't know the backstory, I can see how you would be confused and you would think that these things, were solely the creation of one ethnic group alone. I can understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand your need to defend your heritage because let's face it, the history in this country has been very nasty and it has been very dismissive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
However, two things. Being the victim of oppression and injustice doesn't give you permission to visit the same kind of abuse on somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
There's no problem in defending yourself,
Mm-hmm.
your culture, standing up for it. But why do you have to take it the extra step where you're calling people racial slurs?
Or
Calling
tethers and
tether. I mean, is that a compliment to call somebody a tether?
mm-hmm. Right.
That's a term of abuse. That's verbal abuse. That's an insult. Is it a term of endearment to call Puerto Ricans Puerto rats?
Mm.
You're
Mm.
calling Puerto Ricans rats?
Mm-hmm.
Latino?
Mm-hmm.
Colonizer? First of all, how do we go from how do we go from Puerto Ricans are black, you're black too. Paul Mooney did that stand up routine that Puerto Ricans were just N words that speak
Mm-hmm.
Spanish and can swim.
Right.
How do you go from that to Fat Joe is a white colonizer? How
Right.
do you go from Puerto Ricans are black too to Dr. Cologne is a colonizer?
Mm-hmm.
how do
Right.
you do that?
Right.
What? Because of your skin tone?
Right.
Has anybody taken a goddamn look at Beyonce Knowles? You
Mm-hmm.
know, Tina Knowles' mother? Have you
Mm-hmm.
seen what that woman looked like?
Mm.
Has anybody taken a damn good look at Rosa Parks and what she looked like?
Mm-hmm.
Does she look like a Zulu queen to you
Mm-hmm.
with that light skin and wavy straight hair?
Mm-hmm.
So what the hell are we talking about?
Right. Right.
It's the
Right.
bloodline. We are people of African descent,
Mm-hmm.
but we're not racially pure by any stretch of the imagination. And even the concept of race itself was not something that our ancestors in Africa or the Americas invented. That was applied to us for specific reasons by the elite ruling class for
Mm-hmm.
the purpose of social control and division.
Mm-hmm.
Social control through division.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we're all mixed to
Mm-hmm.
varying degrees.
Right.
Some of us have more European blood. Some of us have more African blood. Some of us have more Native American blood. Some of us are, what the hell? We don't even know how to describe it
But
because
even
everybody looks different.
even when you go by the one drop rule, whoever came up with that, but the one drop rule is one drop of African blood means you're black. You got black in you. So I mean, it is what it is. Like the other people came up with these social constructs. It wasn't us.
It wasn't
It's it,
us.
it's the oppressor who came up with these. The N word and understanding. Okay, so you use that word in the streets, but a Puerto Rican can't use that word, but you use it. But then when we challenge you and say, but you're using a word that was used by the oppressor to speak to you and dehumanize you, and you're using that word as a term of endearment, but we can't use it because we're light skinned. I just heard somebody say this yesterday. They said the only people that could use this are black Puerto Ricans. They could use that word. We'll
Okay,
give you a pass.
so
And
a
I'm
black.
like,
How do you define? So how are we defining black? What the hell is that?
a color. That's what they're
Okay.
saying.
Well,
So,
you know what? You can be a light-skinned Puerto Rican, and your brother and sister could be dark-skinned.
right.
Yo, I'll tell you a funny story.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the firstborn, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm the lightest one in the group,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like the color scheme went light, dark, light, dark.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So my brother, he's dark.
Mm-hmm.
He's like Hershey bar, dark. My little sister, she's about my complexion. So my sister is in a nightclub one day, hanging out with her friends. She hadn't seen my brother in a while because he moved out, and he just happened to be there that night. We call her Chicken.
Mm-hmm.
Chicken, how you doing? What's up? Oh, I'm fine. How you doing? How you doing? You know, and they're catching up. So he goes back with his friends, and you know, his girlfriend, she's pissed. He's like, "What's the matter with you?" She's like, "Who's that B you was talking to?" He said, "That's my sister." He said, "You must really think I'm some kind of dumb blah 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 blah. You over here, you got the nerve to be talking to some right in front of my face." And she started going off on him.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes, he grabs my sister. He brings her over. He says,
Mm-hmm.
"Chicken, can you tell this dumb B who the hell you are to me?" He says, "You're my brother." Her face dropped. She's like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." You don't know how people are related.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right.
I've seen twins, Puerto Rican twins. One of them is your complexion,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one is the same complexion as a stereotypical African American, and they're
Mm-hmm.
twins,
Mm-hmm.
identical twins. Like they look the same, just the color is different.
Right. Right.
So one brother can say it, and the other brother can't. Does that make sense?
Right.
How about we all stop using this word?
Right. Right.
How about that? Instead of trying to defend something, it's like, look,
Mm-hmm.
you can't take 10 tons of crap and make 10 pounds of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't
Mm-hmm.
do it. Crap is crap. No matter how you want to spin it, how you want to twist it. But once again, like I said in the beginning, we were taught to use this word by that members of that community for whatever reason they chose to internalize it and start using it to
Mm-hmm.
refer to themselves and to people in general.
Right.
So anywhere they go, if they're talking to somebody, that person is going to be N because it's the masculine pronoun. That's the way it's
Mm-hmm.
being used.
Right. Right.
You
Right.
my N, you a dumb N. What up, my N?
Mm-hmm.
N over there.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you. So you taught us how to use this language, and now you're mad at us. But you
Exactly.
know, it was the same people that used to clown us because we didn't speak like you.
Mm.
You clowned us because we had an accent.
Mm-hmm.
You clowned us because if we spoke proper English, oh, you trying to, why you talk white?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we assimilated to your lingo, and now you're still upset. What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? Because
Mm-hmm. Right.
it seems like no matter what we do, we can't win.
Mm-hmm.
We can't win.
Mm-hmm.
When we insisted on having our own ethnic identities, you black too.
Mm-hmm.
You ain't nothing but black. The only difference is a stop on the slave ship. Nah, 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 nah. You black, you
Mm.
black, you black. Okay, we black. You're cosplaying. You can't win.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Can't win.
yeah. We're gonna end it here. But this was some good conversation. This was some good digging into the weeds. This is a conversation that needs to be had at a not just the surface level. It has to go deeper. And so we've covered a lot today. Unfortunately, I have to run. Um, but thank you for coming on and sharing your thoughts, your insights. You've always been a supporter of the channel, of what we do here. So thank you for that. And yeah, if you're watching and you're not subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button, like button, share button, and channel membership is also available at 2 levels as well, which will get you some exclusive content for channel members. And we sort of got to pick that up again. I got rid of it once and I changed my mind, so it's all good. But
Oh, good.
I think that this is a healthy conversation that can be had, and we just keep moving forward. Be on the lookout for the docu series that I'm currently working on called "Exploring the Latin Breakdown." It's not going to be long segments, but we're just going to sort of touch on different things. I'm working on part one now, the Latin rhythms in early rap records, and so we're going to look at that in depth. And then please check out the Latin Breakdown documentary. Check out the documentary called Hip Hop is from the Bronx. And yeah, just check out the videos in the channel. There's so many. Where can they find you, your stuff, your videos, your information?
Well, you can find my channel, Truth Teacher 2007. I'm not very active. I'll just let you know that right
Okay.
now.
Mm-hmm.
But I started my channel as a source of information to help cross-cultural understanding, right? And I started out with the ancient Egyptian race controversy thing, and then I moved on to defending African American history and culture, because there was a lot of negativity and lies and slanders about that. So if you look in my playlist, I got a whole bunch of videos in there looking at different examples of African American achievements. Because
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, what I want everyone to understand, two things. Every last single one of us are human beings, and we all have the capacity for greatness in us. We have all contributed to world history and society. Second thing, which is probably, you know, fodder for another discussion, you got to
Mm-hmm.
understand something. Human beings, we need to stop dividing ourselves into black, white, Latino, this, that, and the other. We're all just human beings. We all have the same spirit, the same mind, the same wants, the same needs.
Mm-hmm.
Human beings are dualistic in nature, contradictory and complicated. We have the capacity for great good
Mm-hmm.
within us, but at the same time, we're also capable of unspeakable evil,
Mm-hmm.
each and every one of us.
Mm-hmm.
So, whatever manifestation of evil that you see in the world, you have to know that you, as a human being, somewhere within yourself, that evil also exists. It's only a matter of the circumstances as to whether it manifests itself or not, and also the level of your character.
Mm-hmm.
So, to get back to the original point, is FBA a racist movement? Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all grown up with this myth that, well, black people or non-white people can't be racist. Because yes, you can.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're all, at the end of the day, we're all human beings and we are all capable of the same evil. And this is what we're seeing. What these people, FBA, are doing is evil.
Mm-hmm.
Calling people terrorists, calling them rats, calling them all these. If you heard a white person say it, you'd be losing your mind
Mm-hmm.
at how racist it is. So why are
Mm-hmm.
we cutting somebody a pass just because they got dark skin?
Right.
It's still evil is still
Right.
evil. Okay,
Yeah.
but like I said, we also have the capacity for great good.
Yeah.
And so what I would like to say to the African American community, I make the distinction between FBA and African Americans because I have nothing but the utmost respect and admiration for the African American community. I would
Mm-hmm.
not be here right now as an American citizen without the fight and the struggle and the lives that were lost by African Americans to give me the right to have citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
I do not define the African American community or African Americans in general by the dysfunctional members in their communities. And let's be clear, each and every one of us has dysfunctional members in our communities. So, yes, there are racists in the Caribbean community. Yes, there are racists in the Puerto Rican community.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there are racists in the white American community. That's a no brainer. However, there are also racists in the African American community. They are
Mm-hmm.
evil people everywhere you go, and you have to know that. But we do not define the whole group by the negative elements
Right. Right.
because they have wonderful things and incredibly wonderful people. Don't
Absolutely.
close yourself off by throwing everybody in the same bucket.
Right.
So this is
Right.
no hatred or disrespect whatsoever to the African American community. We're just telling our truth that as people from the Caribbean, we have helped to contribute to American society and we have made contributions. One quick thing,
Mm-hmm.
as we said, hip hop was something that evolved over time. And from the very beginning, West Indians and Puerto Ricans and other, you know, people from certain other Spanish speaking Caribbean islands were a part
Yeah.
of that evolution. We helped in the process. So if you contributed to something when it
Mm-hmm.
was in the process of evolving, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are a co creator of the finished product.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, it belongs to African Americans, absolutely. But it also belongs to us as well, especially those of us who lived through that period when it was being born. It belongs
Mm-hmm.
to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't take anything away from the African American community at all.
Right. That's right.
Not at all.
All right, man. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you, the Travel God, for subscribing. Please subscribe to the channel. I'll talk to you in the next episode. Grace and peace.
Peace out.